Great. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sophia. I organize Spectrum events for you, bringing the community together through learning at Spectrum. So for those of you who are new to Spectrum, we are located at Duo Tower. Aside from providing event spaces, we offer curated workspaces for the community experience. We bring together members and provide connections to expand your business. So today's webinar, in partnership with Healthcare FinTech Alliance, is on 5G as a platform for industry transformation. We are very privileged to have Jim Lim, the founder of 59ST Ventures, a socio-techno network focusing on leveraging expertise, experiences, and connections of senior executives globally to contribute back to society. Jim is also a fellow and adjunct lecturer at NUS. So amongst Jim's long list of credentials, he is currently also the healthcare sector lead for NCS, tasked to build digital healthcare ecosystem and expand its footprint regionally. So before I hand this over to Jim, audience, if you have any questions, post them on here. They will be addressed after Jim's presentation. So without further ado, let's welcome Jim. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. Thanks for the introduction. So let me pull out my slides. Okay, I hope everyone can see my slides. So yeah, as Sophia introduced, among all my portfolios, I'm also the founder of 59ST Ventures, which is a social network. So just before we start on 5G, just very quickly, why is it called 59, right? Someone told me this year that actually the name, although the social networking group was founded in 2017, right? And people actually tell me that it was a forward-looking name because the 59 looks like 5G. Yeah. Okay. So, but that was not the intention. 59 stands for many things. For those of us who came from a telco world, there's a 99.999 telco grade network or telco grade solutions that we always talk about. That's why that's one of the reasons to call 59, right? And then, of course, 59 is also an age where people probably will change their life priorities, especially in terms of career as well, right? So we want to get a lot of good and experienced professionals into this social networking. So feel free to join us, right? And of course, 59 was in 2017, the year of change, right? On the 9th of May, Malaysia, Philippines, and Korea changed their, whether you call it the president or others, yeah. So those are some of the reasons why is it called, right? Beyond just it looks like 5G. Okay, so without further ado, topic today is 5G as a platform for industry transformation, right? I think 5G is a hot topic, especially this year. About 1+ months ago, Singapore announced the award of the 2 license, one to Singtel and the other one to a joint venture company between M1 and StarHub. So everyone is looking at the 5G coming up, and I think most of the people will be curious of what 5G can offer, yeah, to us and to the industry, right? So let me just quickly go in. A quick look at the evolution of mobile technologies. I don't know the age of the participants here, right? But I'm probably old enough to start work when we are at the 2G stage. And I actually implemented many solutions in Asia Pacific for 3G systems and 4G systems, and of course now looking at 5G. Yeah. So a quick look, what is the difference between 1G, 2G, all the way to 5G, right? In the 1G world, for those who are, again, old enough, I'm probably not old enough to use it yet, not rich enough at that time to use a 1G phone. It's like a water bottle phone. Yeah, and to many who know Chinese, it actually stands, there's a name for it called 大哥大, right? Big brother, something like that, yeah? And it is in a lot of those Chinese movies where the rich, the very rich, and maybe even the secret societies are using this phone to communicate, right? But basically, you need to be rather well off to be able to carry a mobile phone of 1G. And of course, what it's used for is used for voice calls mainly, yeah? And when we go into the 2G world, where most of us would have used or know this Nokia phone, which is very, very popular. Of course, today Nokia don't manufacture phones anymore, right? They have sold off the business, right? But 2G world is really a text which mainly is SMS, text and talk world. So you have the voice call, added on capabilities is on text. Yeah. And we always talk about killer application for those of us who are in the telco world, right? What are the killer applications for everyone? So when 3G come, people ask, I'm so happy with SMS and I can do my voice call. So what are the killer application, right? We always say SMS is a killer application of 2G. What is the killer application for 3G? So comes 3G world without knowing too much of what can we benefit from 3G except for better speed, right? It came the data world, right? Today is so common for every one of us. We use WhatsApp, we use data. We always say, hey, my data not enough. Maybe I need to switch to Wi-Fi so that I can conserve my data. There are some countries like Taiwan, which they call it the unlimited data or eat all you can data, which you have unlimited data for usage, right? So 3G world, before we started implementing 3G system, we actually never thought of what is the killer application of 3G, to be very frank. But somehow there are applications coming out and 3G becomes, the data becomes the killer application for 3G. Yeah. And of course, with the data, it brings us to mobile internet world. Yeah. And let's look at 4G. Again, when 4G came out, I was in Taiwan at that time, implementing, launching 4G systems back in 2013, I think. Yeah. And Singapore was, I think, half a year or 1 year later than Taiwan, right, to launch, to commercialize 4G. But again, when 4G came out, everyone thinking, okay, it's going to be faster speed. I'm so happy with my data and mobile internet already in 3G. What is it in 4G world that I can benefit, right? No one thought about that when we start planning for 4G. But of course, as 4G evolved, there are new applications coming out and there are new companies, new business coming out, and people kind of invented or rather popularized the use of videos. So if you can remember in the 3G world, YouTube is already there. Yeah, but people don't really use mobile to watch YouTube movie because it consumes a lot of data, right? And the speed and the bandwidth is not good enough and you always have lagging. So people still, during the 3G world, use YouTube on your browser, on your laptop, on your computer, right? But of course, with 4G, YouTube becomes so popularized that you can actually stream very smoothly on your mobile phone. And video and of course, social media become the killer application of 4G. Right, I'm sure this 1 or 2 weeks, you heard of this name called TikTok, right? The mother company, the parent company is called ByteDance. It's a Chinese company, something like YouTube, but it's a shorter version, right? YouTube, you can have long videos, long movies, long things, but in TikTok, it's usually short, right? Within a minute kind of thing. So now US wanted to ban TikTok, right? For whatever reason it is. But again, video and social media becomes the killer application of 4G. So now comes to 5G world. If you ask me what's the killer application of 5G, I can tell you there are so many companies from the telco vendors such as Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia, all the telco companies in Singapore. You have your Singtel, M1, StarHub, and overseas you have your big ones like AT&T, Verizon, big ones in China, China Telecom, China Mobile. Everyone giving us many use cases. You can Google, you go to their website, you can see many use cases. But are they the killer application? I'm quite sure, and I can tell you, nobody knows what is a killer application. Just like we didn't know when 3G and 4G will come, right? So what is 5G? Nobody knows what a killer application. It probably one of us in this webinar may be one of those who will invent or come up with a killer application for 5G, and you will become the TikTok, or you will become the WhatsApps or WeChat or YouTube of the 5G world. Yeah. So there are a lot of use cases which we'll take a look at some of them later on. But again, I think when 5G first, the term or the concept was coined to the public in about 2+ years ago, people always look at phones, right? Because as a consumers, we don't really know the backend technology of what the different G stands for. But to us, the most direct impression of the different evolution is on the mobile phone, right? From a Nokia look phone, text phone, to ergonomic phone like the iPhone. And of course, in 5G, people are saying that, oh, 5G phone tomorrow will be a foldable phone, right? It may not be so, it may be so, we don't know yet. But of course, many companies, including Samsung and Huawei, are trying to come out with foldable phone. And why is it so? Because in 5G, everyone is trying to look at what is the evolution, right? So we are imagining that 5G, I will use it more because of data, because of video, because of social media. I'll use it more like a laptop, right, or a tablet. So it needs to be having big enough screen. So in order to still look like a phone and not as bulky, and yet has the capability of a laptop or a tablet, so the foldable phone is born, yeah, from there. So it may be really a 5G phone. We don't know yet, right? It's already there, but we shall see, yeah. But of course, there's also a more advanced thought of what a 5G phone or 5G will look like, right? It's something that is panel-like, very thin panel. And this is not the sci-fi, yeah? There is a company in China that I have visited and know them quite well. They are not in Singapore yet. They are called Royole. The company's name is called Royole, Royole, right? They do a lot of very thin panel that can put on your shirt and your hat as well. And of course, a thin panel across on your hand to look like a phone, yeah? So that is already in progress, yeah? And they actually launched their very thin panel kind of phone that can be placed on your body or your hand in CES, yeah, the Consumer Electronics Show in US last year, right? So again, 5G phone, is it a foldable phone, or is it a thin panel-like phone that can just somehow embed onto your hand or your body? Yet to be seen, yeah? But again, we are all trying to see what is the next killer application of 5G. So again, quickly, the world is chasing after 5G. So you can see that whether is it in Kuwait, in Finland, right, in Philippines, everyone is doing so many different trials of 5G. And of course, later on, we'll see more details on the use cases. But again, generally, people are believing that 5G is like enhanced or enlarged connected world, right? You have everything connected. You will be able to watch and download and stream videos very fast on your mobile phone because of the bandwidth and the speed that it provides. Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of talk on autonomous vehicle, which again, everyone is saying that 5G will allow you to do the autonomous vehicle more successfully. Yeah, and we'll take a look on why is it so, right? So some numbers to take a look. Yeah, there are altogether currently about 87 operators, the telco operators, right, in 36 countries have already launched 5G trials, including Singapore. Yeah, I think most of the ASEAN countries are quite running at the forefront, right? Because again, in technology, there's this thing called leapfrogging. So there are many countries who are not that mature yet. They can actually leapfrog from even 3G to 5G. Yeah. So there are actually altogether 36 countries already launching 5G trials. Yeah, and for those of you who may not be technical enough, in order for 5G to be running, it's not about just your mobile phone. The most important base thing, apart from all the infrastructure, is the spectrum, right? So Singapore award the 2 licenses this few months ago is because we have identified the spectrum to be given. And in 5G, there are many different spectrums involved, right? There's a common spectrum like the 3.5 gigahertz that Singapore is awarding for public use. There's also the millimeter wave that is of a higher frequency band, which are more confined, yeah, and for like a stadium kind of settings that is very good to use. Yeah, and it's predicted that by end of this year we will have 250 million 5G subscribers. Okay, and of course there are so many different phones, and today you probably already see from advertisements there are phones from Huawei, from Samsung, and soon from Apple on 5G smartphones. Yeah. So looks nice. Everyone is having trials. There are so many so-called use cases. We don't know, are they going to be killer applications? Doesn't matter, right? But is the business model of 5G ready, right? What is the real use case? Is it just faster speed? So what can 5G offer us, right? Is it just faster speed, right? So let's take a look at the difference between 5G and 4G, because today most of us are using 4G, right? Although some countries in Europe or in like Middle East and Africa may still be using 3G, but most of us are probably experiencing and using 4G. So what is 5G as compared to 4G, right? So these are the offering of 5G. Let's take a look how they compare with 4G, okay? So I think the one that everyone kind of know is the throughput, right? Which is actually your download speed, your uplink, downlink speed, right? So in terms of throughput, right, LTE stands for long-term evolution, which is basically your 4G, right? So in the 4G world, you can have 150 megabit per second to 1 gigabit per second, which is under LTE-A, right? So this is the speed that you can get for 4G. In 5G, you can get 10 times more, right? At least 10 times more. So of course, this is, as a consumer, we foresee that we can download things faster, right? There's a report to always say that, okay, maybe it takes 10 minutes to 15 minutes to download something from YouTube, but with 5G, you just need maybe within 1 minute you can do it, right? So it's 10 times faster, right? But actually, other than the speed and the throughput, what 5G can offer as compared to 4G is more important from other perspective. The first one is latency. This is something very, very important, right? Latency is basically something like, is there any delay in the communication, right? So in the 4G world, the latency is about 30 to 50 millisecond, right? But in 5G, the standard is about 1 millisecond, but from the previous company where I worked in, one of the telco vendor provider, global telco provider, it's really, you can go down to even sub-millisecond, yeah? And how important is this latency? We'll take a look in a while, right? Basically, is the precision. So anything that needs precision, you need to have very good and low latency. For example, in the healthcare industry, right? Since I'm doing a lot of healthcare today, to do a remote surgery, right? Let's say you have someone in Singapore and someone in Shanghai, right? You need to have the sub-millisecond latency and precision, right? That's where 5G actually add much more value as compared to 4G, yeah? The other thing is the connections. So it's 100 times more in the 5G world. And why? What is this connection thing and why is it important? So today, some of you may have already heard of the term called IoT, Internet of Things. So Internet of Things is basically like, for those consumer, right, you probably know smart home, right? Whether it's a Samsung or your Google, right? You have a smart home that can control your curtains, your lights and everything, right? That is IoT to some extent from a home setting. And of course, Singapore is well known as a smart nation, right, which is similar to smart cities. So connections, we are talking about things like smart metering. So in the HDB flat, you will have your 3 meters, your gas meter, your electricity meter, and your water meter. So all these things, rather than everyone has to come down to take a look at the readings and then bill you and all those things, right? In a smart IoT settings, all this smart metering will be able to self-collect, right, because of the sensors of the data, and then you pass back and do the analysis, right? So it really is a connected devices, connected world kind of settings. And that's where the connections importance is, yeah? And of course, in future, in the smart city or smart nation, we talk about things like even on your lamppost on the road, along the road, right? You can have cameras to do surveillance and so on and so forth. So everything will be connected, right? And it's important to have 5G, because with more things being connected, you need the bandwidth to support. And 4G cannot offer enough bandwidth for a fully connected world. Okay, the next two is a little bit technical, so I'll just go quickly, right? And of course, in terms of mobility of 5G, it can give you the mobility like a high-speed rail, right? 500 kilometers per hour as compared to 4G. And the other capabilities is called network slicing, which you can imagine, unlike in a 4G world, right? 5G, you are going to have, you can imagine like a cake, right? So 5G is a cake and can slice the cake into different slices. And every of these slices can represent a vertical industry. For example, one slice of healthcare, one slice of government services, one slice for autonomous driving. And all these slices are important to, of course, offer the capabilities that is independent and no interference from another industry, right? And it's not just slices by industry. It can slice by offerings. For example, you can have an IoT slice as compared to, let's say, a video AR, VR kind of slices, right? So this is a little bit more technical. We can always discuss it further in future, yeah. Okay, so let's take a look. For those of actually, I teach 5G in university and also for corporate training, right? So I think many people think that 5G is a very telecom specific topics, but what we're trying to say here is actually 5G is an industry topic, right? Because you will see later on in the 5G world, it's no longer just a telecom companies like a Singtel, M1, StarHub selling to you as a consumer, right? You need to have an ecosystem play, and the industry like healthcare, manufacturing, and so on and so forth become very important in the entire 5G ecosystems. right? So for those of the people who are not telco background, but will be involved a lot in 5G, I always tell them there's one thing that you need to know, and if you attend my class, there's one thing that if you forget every other thing, there's only one thing I need you to remember. That's what I call the 5G capabilities triangle, right? So this is a standard, no matter which telco or which telecom vendors, they will have to go by the standard, right? It's by ITU, right? And that's the International Telecom Union, right? And ITU define 5G capabilities as three important things. One is what we call the EMBB, Enhanced Mobile Broadband, right? The other one is MMTC. It's called the Massive Machine Tap Communications. And the last one is URLLC, Ultra Reliable Low Latency Communication, right? So you can see in this triangle that you have many different applications or use cases under different things, right? So enhanced mobile broadband, what is it, right? You can ignore the fixed wireless access for now because to Singapore, we are I think more than 100% or at least 90% fiber connected. So we don't really need much of this fixed wireless access for the last mile, right? But in the enhanced mobile broadband world, it is something where us as consumer can appreciate better, because this is where you can really have the bandwidth, you can have the better download, upload speed, right? So this is where things like 4K, 8K videos, right, AR, VR, where you do virtual gaming, online gaming, right, and cloud gaming, right, and then your home broadband can be faster, right, you can have a TV running well, right. So these are the ones that can leverage on this EMBB capabilities of a 5G, which is to some extent still pretty much consumer driven. Yeah. The next one is MMTC, the massive machine tap. As I mentioned, today world is an IoT world, right? Tomorrow's world is IoT times many times more world, right? And that's where your smart home, as I mentioned before, right? Your smart metering in terms of energy and utilities, right? Singapore probably don't have smart agriculture, but I remember 2.5 years ago when I was with Huawei, right? One of the customer that we have in Malaysia deals with a lot of plantations, right? Rubber plantation and so on and so forth. So we are saying that, okay, you put IoT devices, sensors to the rubber tree, right? And then you can start collecting data to see whether the foreign workers really cut at the right place. And then did they steal anything, or did they cut and then they need to ensure that the data collected is passed over to do good analysis so they can always have the best yield, right? So this is some kind of smart agriculture that use cases that we can use a lot of IoT devices. Yeah. And of course, logistics is about fleet management. So companies like DHL, FedEx use a lot of IoT sensors and devices for what we call fleet management. And of course, tomorrow, 5G will offer more for that. Yeah. Of course, smart city, as I mentioned before, right? And URLLC is, as I said just now, is about low latency. And one of the industry use case is really smart surgery, right? That's what we, remote surgery, that's what we talk about. And of course, things like self-driving, autonomous vehicle, right? Again, you need the very precise, the precision level, right? And low latency is one of the key things to ensure that the response, the communication between the console and the vehicle, right, to give command is really sub-millisecond or 1 millisecond kind of response. If not, then it may go haywire, right? The command and response, between the command and the response of the vehicle and the console, there's a certain latency, there's certain delay. Then the sub-millisecond, whether is it the traffic light turning from orange to red, all these things can create problem, yeah? So these are the three key capabilities of what 5G can offer. Okay, so a little bit technical on this. So I was at a webinar, I think about 3 weeks ago with another telco from US, right? And they are the first one to launch 5G in US. That was in 2018. So some audience asked, 5G infrastructure, and those of you who knows the standards, like the different 3GPP standards, which is the one defining the standards of 5G, right? Saying that now we are still evolving. Even until last year, the standards are still changing. How can someone launch 5G in 2018 when you may not have all the infrastructure and when standards are still changing, right? So that is where the term, a little bit technical, called non-standalone NSA and standalone SA come about, right? So non-standalone basically is that your actual core network is still on a 4G network, right? And then your actually radio, right, is using 5G, right? NR stands for new radio, right? I wouldn't go into the too much technical details here because I believe most of the people here are the industry player, yeah? But basically, in a non-standalone world, that's where many countries like China, Korea, US launched 5G services back in 2018 when all the infrastructure and standards are still evolving. Is because they use a non-standalone kind of a configuration, yeah? And that is very useful for the capabilities called EMBB to be used. So at that time, people are already able to trial with AR, VR, cloud gaming, and so on and so forth, right? Because that's only using one capabilities of 5G, and it's mainly in a B2C kind of settings, yeah? And in a real full 5G world, right, it's actually a standalone, which Singapore launching 3.5 gigahertz by the two companies is going to be a standalone architecture, right? And the two other capabilities of 5G of URLC and MMTC can only come into full-fledged service with the standalone deployment. Yep. Okay. So yeah, as mentioned here, Singapore commercial 5G will be in 3.5 gigahertz in a standalone mode. Okay. So this is to answer some of the questions that people had before of how come people can launch 5G back in 2018 when things are still evolving, okay? Quickly, so as I mentioned, and as the topic suggested, 5G is really a platform for industry transformation. So frankly, as of the study today, launching 5G cannot really get all the ROI for the telco companies, right, including the vendors, if it is just focusing on faster speed and if it's just focusing on doing a consumer offering. It will not be as good ROI as others, yeah? So 5G really, apart from the faster speed, as I mentioned before, is to transform industry. One of them you see, and I talk a lot about, is robotic surgery, right? And there's still a lot of doubts on that, right? Why do I want to do a robotic surgery? We'll take a look at it later. There's one use case there, yeah. And the other one is VR, AR, right? Virtual reality, augmented reality, or people may call it MR, mixed reality, right? In general, we even use the word XR, right? That can X can means A, can means V, can means M, yeah? And this is already deployed with the EMBB as I shown just now, right? And it's very useful. It's not just for gaming, right? People always think about it as a gaming. Moving forward, of course, now it's still very heavy glasses, and you have more better glasses, smaller and more effective glasses coming out, right? And we have seen even in the healthcare industry that's used for like CPR education, right? So you can use this to do the education, and of course the actual remote surgery education, not the actual operation, but education can also be done using this AR, VR kind of technology, yeah. Next one, the fish farming, I wouldn't talk about here. It probably is not that relevant for Singapore audience, yeah. But of course, it's very similar to the rubber plantation kind of concept I described, right? It's under smart agriculture to some extent, although this is fish farming, right? But basically you have a lot of sensors, and these sensors can help to collect the data and do the analysis so that the ultimate aim is a better yield, right? Y-I-E-L-D, yeah. Okay, this is again may not be that familiar with the Singapore setting, right? Because we don't really have a lot of mining, right? But this is a very common use cases that I've seen shown by people like Huawei, Ericsson, and Nokia in some of the seminars that I've attended, right? So this unmanned robotic mining really is like a drones to some extent, right? But much bigger and involve robotics as well. So with the 5G offerings of the good speed in the and the throughput for EMBB, the low latency to facilitate the communications between the central console and the actual vehicle, right? And then of course the connected world, the MMTC, right? Because you have sensors on this robotics machineries or equipments as well. So this is actually something that make full use of 5G capabilities to do the robotic mining. And of course, if I extend this to a Singapore context, you'll see later on there's already a trial at Maritime Port Authority, MPA of Singapore. That is something like an unmanned operation as well, although it's not about mining. Yeah. Okay, smart tourism. Now nobody can travel, right? but there are already companies, and I've seen the demo from some Chinese software company, where using AR VR technologies, you can try to be like at the actual place itself, right? Even I've seen someone doing like a safari of Africa, right? You can wear the VR glasses, and then with all the settings taken for the actual safari, you can really feel like you are in the car and the lions are running beside you. So that's part of a smart tourism offering. And again, that is leveraging a lot on the 5G capabilities. Of course, 4G today you can do it as well, but due to the latency, right, and the throughput, so sometimes you may feel giddy if there's a lot of movement, right? Especially like in tourism case, there's movement and you may feel giddy, right? And 5G will reduce that giddiness that you are using the VR applications. Okay. Last but not least, no, not the last one yet, live action sports. So as I was saying, you can have using again like the VR technology, you can feel yourself like an audience in a live sports setting, right? And of course, with millimeter wave kind of offerings of 5G, that's another case where you can ensure everyone in the stadium can have that speed to do the necessary mobile communication. Yeah. Okay, let me just quickly move on. Smart manufacturing. I will have one slide to talk about that, right? But that's another one that's very commonly quoted as a use case for 5G. Yeah. And the last one is about smart agriculture, which I already talked about just now. Yeah. Okay, so these are some of the common use cases that many companies actually quoted. But again, as I mentioned, are any of this going to be a killer application? Unknown yet for us to find out. And after all these trials and commercialization, the one with the first mover advantage and innovative solutions will really be able to generate the killer application. Yeah. Okay, so very quickly, I will focus on two industry use cases here, mainly because of their sizes, right? So one of them is manufacturing, the other one is healthcare, right? So from this study by STL Partners in UK, you can see that manufacturing, right, 5G will contribute 1.4 trillion US dollar to the global GDP, and manufacturing, right, by year 2030 will be the largest, right? Even from now to 2030, manufacturing is contribute the largest. 5G contribute largest to the growth and the GDP of manufacturing. And what is it impacting manufacturing, right? So you can see from this left bottom corner, right? It's going to create 740 billion in additional GDP by 2030 just in manufacturing, right? And it's split by countries, North America, East Asia, and so on and so forth, right? So this is what it's going to add, and we'll see in the next slide the smart manufacturing kind of use cases, right? And for the 5G impact in healthcare, there are three key things being listed here, but being in healthcare today, I'm seeing much more than that, right? So things like remote patient monitoring, which again, I'll explain later. Today, in Singapore or maybe in the global, we do not use a lot of remote monitoring yet, right? We do teleconsult. That means we either use an apps through a video call to the doctors and do a teleconsult, right? But we don't do a tele-diagnostic yet. Yeah. But in future with 5G, we're expecting to have more of this remote monitoring, which I can also term it as a tele-diagnostic. Yeah. And of course, virtual consultation is like your teleconsultation that I talk about, and there are others. So 5G impact to healthcare, although it's not the second largest, right? Manufacturing is the largest, followed by retail, followed by transportation, which is like fleet management and logistic, right? And then the fourth one is health. But because I'm in healthcare today and I'm studying quite a lot on 5G impact in healthcare, right? That's why we want to share manufacturing and healthcare today. Okay. Okay, let's go to smart manufacturing. So again, what we try to map up here is on the left-hand side, you can see this table, right? There are four key things that's happening in the smart factory, smart manufacturing case, right? It's using the capabilities of 5G like URLLC, right? MMTC, and EMBB, right? So if I go through this process, right, things like ubiquitous wireless connection. So today, right, again, depending on the size of the factory, when I was working in China, many of the factories before 5G was launched, they are using a lot of lease line, wireline connections, right? Some of them may be using wireless, right? But very few, if there is any, using 4G, right? Most of them are using Wi-Fi for that. But to some extent, for those of us who know Wi-Fi itself is much less secure as compared to the 5G and the 4G, right? That's why there is always talk by the police, right? If you are in a public area using public Wi-Fi, try not to do any online transactions because you may be hacked, right? It's less secure as compared to using your data, which is today on 4G. So by similar token, Wi-Fi in a factory setting, right, is less secure, although it can be dedicated. Yeah. So tomorrow's world, 5G can offer this good wireless connection, right, which today 4G cannot. Yeah, because of the multiple connected devices. Yeah, of course, there are other possible technology, like today, there's the launch of this thing called Wi-Fi 6, right, which can also potentially serve that need. But again, like what we have discussed in one of the webinar, whether you use a Wi-Fi 6 or you use 5G, it depends on the size of your factory, the needs, what you want to use for, the use cases, and of course, your budget. Yeah. Okay. The other thing is sensor data acquisition. So in a smart factory, right, there are going to be a lot of sensors. What are the sensors used for? Right, it's used for predictive machine analytics, which can means that, okay, you have all the sensors on your machines, right, so that it can do a predictive maintenance. So you know, you can roughly collect data, and then you can see there's machine learning being deployed, the AI being deployed to see when likely that this machine is going to break down and what you need to do predictive maintenance, right? So these will need sensors, and sensors will acquire the data, right? So this is some kind of connections, right, under sensors data acquisition. And of course, you also do real-time remote production monitoring, right? Again, you need sensors for that to happen, yeah? And then this is by itself already say sensor-based machinery, right? So remote management, right? There are some videos that you can see on YouTube that people take a pad, right, a tablet, and you can start monitoring not in the factory itself, right? So this again are through some connected sensors, right? Sensor-based scanner. So you can see everything is sensor, right? Sensor-based smart truck also linked to your fleet management, right? So everything is sensor, and there are so many sensors. As I mentioned, there's this capability called MMTC, massive machine type communication. So with so many sensors, your 4G doesn't have enough bandwidth to sustain all of them, and that's why 5G offers the bandwidth that's needed for that. Yeah. So I already talked about equipment predictive maintenance, right? So all these are linked to the MMTC capabilities. Yeah. Okay. So this is what is happening in the factory floor that we have seen in some of the smart factory in China. Yeah. And of course, we may not have so many factories in Singapore. We have some, but may not be the largest. Although I was told by EDB, I think 3 years ago, actually manufacturing sector and its related services contribute the highest to Singapore GDP as well. Yeah. But again, moving beyond a factory floor setting, right? Outside of enclosed factory floor, they are also manufacturing related. For example, on the right-hand side, there's this oil rigs, right? So this is very similar to the unmanned mining robots, right? Again, you use unmanned operations for oil rigs because these are to some extent dangerous places for human to keep on working there, right? So as far as possible, there is intention to automate some of this into an unmanned operation. So thinking out loud, it may be applicable to Singapore Jurong Islands operation one day. Yeah. Surveillance and inspection using 5G drones, right? Again, just now we already seen drones is to some extent unmanned vehicles, right? Although it's much smaller than equipment or robotics, but again, it's unmanned. And with a 5G capability, all this unmanned, autonomous kind of thing will benefit from the 5G capabilities, right? And again, I was also 3 years ago discussing with a company that provide services to a petroleum company without naming it, right? So you have drones that can do this monitoring, right, and inspection of the operations. They also come up with what they call the anti-drones technology, which is very interesting because you are also worried that your competitor or maybe in some countries, even your competing countries, right, or your enemy's country may send drones to bomb your oil rigs or petroleum plant, right? And that's where this anti-drone technology, you can do a Google of that. It's very interesting when I read about that, right? Anti-drone technology that can do anti-drone monitoring and any sabotage, okay? Yeah, so this is a smart manufacturing use case. let's quickly move on to a healthcare use case, right? I'll just, with the time, I'll just quickly move on to all the three. So again, I kind of classify them into the EMBB capabilities on the leftmost, middle is the MMTC, and the rightmost is the URLC. So in EMBB world, right? So for example, increasing data-heavy applications, like we want to use AR/VR for remote education, whether is it CPR, is it remote surgery, right? Using AR/VR. The current solution is to do traffic optimization. So without 5G, right? Current solutions means without 5G, what do you do, right? So in a hospital setting, there's a lot of traffic offloading into other networks. It can be dedicated lease line, it can be Wi-Fi, depending on security level, right? But 5G, you don't need to do all these different types of connections or connectivity. 5G alone should be able to handle the traffic, yeah, because of the EMBB capabilities for that, right? So the healthcare applications will be things like AR/VR for remote education, diagnosis, and surgery. But this case, we're talking about demo, because the actual surgery operation we classify under the third box here, yeah. So the second box is, again, the MMTC, which I say is the IoT, right? So in the healthcare settings, there is this term which you can Google also, it's called IOMT, Internet of Medical Thing, right? So just like IoT, just that here we focus on medical devices. And medical devices, you can look at it from two perspectives. One is within the hospital settings, you have many different equipments, right, that you need to kind of connect them, right? And the other one is with the consumerization of healthcare, these IOMT also move outside of the hospital setting. For example, right, you can imagine a case where I'm wearing remote diagnostic wearables or maybe ECG, right? So I'm not connected to the hospital when I'm at home, right? But in the future 5G world, there is a use case where people are saying that, okay, instead of everything done in the hospital or before going into the hospital, I can have all the medical devices, consumer medical devices on myself, right? Doing the long-term monitoring, whether, especially for chronic diseases, right? Then all my data will be periodically sent back to the hospital settings, yeah? And if anything goes wrong, right, there will be a virtual ambulance or connected ambulance that's being triggered when a person with chronic disease suddenly collapse at home, right? And the ambulance will come and pick the person up or connect or informing the relative or family members. And then before going to the hospitals, all the data of the long-term monitoring is already passed to the hospital itself, right? So in the IOMT world, it's not just connected devices within the hospital setting, but it's also looking at moving some of this outside of the hospital setting into the home care or community-based healthcare. Yeah, but of course there will be security concerns, and we can talk more about that, right, separately. Okay, so current solutions of all these connected devices are running a lot on 4G network, which has a bandwidth limitation, right? And there's also some of them, for those of you familiar with IoT, there are different standards and network, right? There is this thing called LoRa, which is quite widely used in Europe, right? You have Zigwave, and Sigfox and Zigbee. So there are different IoT networks standards. Singapore is going to standardize for the broad one. It's going to be MPLT together with 5G. Yeah. So yes, there are solutions, but again, disintegrated, which may cause data synchronization problem, right? And some of these may have security issue because a lot of these are under what we call the unlicensed spectrum operations. Yeah. Okay, so 5G will enable all this, as I mentioned. I would not repeat it, right? And it's very useful, and this is highly thought as a very important and likely use case in the healthcare setting, right? You can see all this like a panel-like kind of thing that's embedded or attached to your body, right? For all this health monitoring. Yeah, and all these are not nirvana. Some of these are already being manufactured and under trials. Okay, the last one is about remote surgery, right? Without going into too much detail, I already described a lot of that, right? Doing remote surgery because of the low latency that give you the precision. And of course, in future, we are looking at human-robots collaboration, which there's a term called cobots, right? So you have the real doctors working with robotic arms because of precision, right? And going to do the operations together. So again, these are use cases, they are already happening. Okay, so you have seen the manufacturing case, you have now seen the healthcare. So very quickly, again, one more slide on healthcare. I think that was in February or March this year, right? China has already successfully tested the world first remote surgery using 5G mobile network. So you can do more search about that, yeah? So, and on the left-hand side, you can see the y-axis is your latency, right? You can still do remote diagnostic, walk rounds, drones, right? If your latency is not that low. But to really do a AR-aided surgery or surgical robots, you need super low latency, right? And this one is on the throughput. The x-axis is a throughput, yeah. Okay, quickly, 5G value systems, right? So as I mentioned, maybe even up to the 4G world, as consumer or as a vertical industry, right? Whether you're in healthcare, you're in retail or whatever, you still work with the telco companies of Singtel, M1, StarHub, like buying things off them, right? Whether we're consumer or we're enterprise. That's why you can see in today's world, you are familiar with the telco organization. They are still very classified like consumer, right? Enterprise. You have a CEO for enterprise, CEO for consumer, CEO for international, and so on and so forth, right? This is how a telco is set. And of course, with 3G and especially 4G, the telco companies realize that there's this big thing called over-the-top OTT providers, right, which actually offer applications on top of the network, right, and you may not be able to charge them at that time. So people like WhatsApps, right, these actually disrupted the entire telco ecosystems. And how many of us really pay to use IDD call today, right? If for those old enough to remember, we always dial 001, followed by the country code, followed by the phone number. So that's IDD call. And we all remember that we pay a lot for that, right? With WhatsApps, WeChat, Skype, and all this coming up, who really pay for the IDD call today, right? You just call your relative overseas using WhatsApps, right? And you can do video call as well, right? So telco companies or telco ecosystem is being disrupted every now and then as well, right? And in the 4G world, it's still pretty much looking like this, right? It's still a very telco providing connectivity in a pipe to the consumer or the enterprises. But in the 5G ecosystem, everyone is foreseeing a change in that, right? Of course, you still have all this that telco need to serve, but the use cases is going to come also from the industry player of the healthcare, of the manufacturing, and so on and so forth, right? It's no longer that, okay, as a telco, I mean, it can be, right? A telco may choose, I still just sell you connectivity, right? You buy a bulk of data from me, and then you can use it. But they are going to remain what we always call as a dump pipe. And the more forward-looking telco do not want to remain as a dump pipe, because how much can you sell connectivity for? The one who are making money today are the WhatsApps and the TikTok and others, right? So how do you collaborate with the industry player in future? Let's say, take the case of smart manufacturing again. So the telco can sell the connectivity to the factory, right? And that's it. But the factory will work with an IoT system provider, content provider, right? Healthcare will work with people who built content for AR, VR education. So how can telco do all this thing and get involved in the ecosystem? The more forward-looking one will want to do bundling, right? Together with some of this content provider. And maybe you work with a healthcare provider. Let's say you work with, just for example, Singtel work with Tan Tock Seng Hospital, right? Come out with a remote CPR education, right? And of course, you have content providers there. And then you can package it and sell it, right? Another case can be what is STL partner from UK keep on pitching, right? Telco in health. So in tomorrow's world, probably you have a lot of remote home-based diagnostic and monitoring. That's where you can actually offer, right, a remote home-based kind of healthcare solutions to the consumer as well, right? So that's the value systems. Okay, I think they're telling me I'm running out of time a little bit. So quickly go into 5G ecosystems, right? So I was asked to present in investor forums, right? Where they are not techies, they are not interested on building the 5G application. They want to know what company to invest in, buy their stocks. Yeah. So I'm not telling you a stock pick here. I don't intend to, right? But what I want to say is that you don't just buy a telco stocks, right? Because again, as you've seen by now, 5G is an ecosystem. It's not just the telco will benefit from it. In fact, if telco are not forward-looking enough, they may not benefit from it. So you don't need to go and buy a Huawei, which you can't buy because it's not listed. Right? You don't need to just go and buy a Cisco or Samsung or Ericsson stock. These are the ecosystem players who may be making a big difference if any of this become a killer application like the 3G and 4G world, right? And all this, again, if you remember, and you must remember your 5G capabilities triangle, right? The EMBB, the MMTC, the URLC, right? So for all this, you have a lot of companies coming out with different applications, right? EMBB, I think all of us will be most familiar because that's linked to the consumer world, right? 4K video, internet gaming, cloud computing. Probably something that's not so familiar to you is telepresence, right? So EMBB is something that you can look at. And then MMTC is a lot with the IoT companies, right? So your smart home buildings, you probably never heard of some of these companies, right? For those of you who probably know, it's limited to Google, Samsung, and Xiaomi. But does Xiaomi or does Google manufacture all the IoT devices? They don't. Actually, they work with many companies like Xiaomi is an ecosystem. So for those of you familiar, right, since I know them quite well, they don't build all the devices, you know, they actually outsource. They build the platform. They are the ecosystem owner, but all the smaller companies in China, and that's how they make it big, they start building the devices that can connect to a Xiaomi platform. The same goes to Google, the same goes to others. So the big companies, of course, you can buy their stock, but they are more the ecosystem owner and the platform owner, right? You have other companies, smaller ones, which will have a higher potential growth, right? So same thing for URLC, you have another bunch of companies here that are focusing on URLC, right? So remember, 5G is really an ecosystem, and I'm looking forward to maybe companies who can set up new companies to benefit from the 5G, yeah? So quickly, I understand, although this is audience coming from different countries, but maybe main bulk of them come from Singapore, so people will be interested on how is 5G status in Singapore, right? A few things, the bottom right first, right? 5G coverage for the commercial launches, like people like us, the consumer will benefit from it. IMDA has asked the two companies, Singtel and the JVCo. JVCo is a joint venture company between M1 and StarHub, right? These two companies need to roll out 5G standalone network, right? By end of 2020, need to cover 50% of Singapore, yeah? By end of 2025, need to cover at least 95% of Singapore, right? If not, there will be potentially penalties. So this is the Singapore 5G status, right? And IMDA, this one you can go to IMDA website to get, right? They are focusing on a few industries. So for Singapore companies who may want to benefit from 5G rollout in Singapore, right? You can focus in things like smart estates, right? So these are the things that there is a trial between CapitaLand, the Info Data Tech, and TPG on smart estate, right? That's the CV2X. V2X stands for vehicle to everything, right? Or anything, right? It can be vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to human, or whatever, right? So basically that is under smart estate. Of course, Industrial 4.0, everyone talk about this term, right? But what does it really mean? So IMDA focusing for this, for 5G, is really to look at AI, IoT, and robotics, which there are many companies and trials that's happening, yeah. Mobility, autonomous vehicle, right? You have NTU and M1 that already tested it. I think it's in the news. Many of you read about that. Recently, I have brought in a Chinese company called Neolix, right? Chinese is called 新石器时代无人车. It's something like a new Stone Age autonomous driving, right? So they are trying to do some autonomous driving because they are very successful. They are an Alibaba invested company. And during this COVID-19 situation, their autonomous vehicle actually was deployed in China, doing disinfection, number one, and also distributing the medical PPE, the personal protection equipments like the mask, the glove, the so on and so forth, to the public, right? So it was a very useful use case for COVID-19. Yeah. Maritime, as I mentioned, you have seen just now also your unmanned vehicle, right, or AGV or drones that's doing the inspection and doing unmanned operation. That's already happening between Singtel M1 and PSA. Yeah. So of course, consumer applications, there are plenty of it. Everyone is coming out with new AR/VR glasses, new online gaming, right? But of course, the biggest news is about Razer and Singapore and Singtel launching the cloud gaming. Yeah. So these are some of the focus areas of Singapore 5G trials, and of course, welcome new companies to join in as well, right? Okay, future skills of 5G. So I presented 5G in a Skill Future Festival, I think last week, right? Organized by the government, right? SSG and WSG. So I was asked the question. So if today I'm not a telco background person, I'm not an engineering background person, so can I find a job in this 5G ecosystem? The answer is yes, because apart from all the networking, right? There is a lot of, like I say, content development. So I work very closely with AR/VR companies, right, to develop contents. Most of these people don't have telco background. They are not even engineers, right? You have, like in the advertising world, you have creative director who really know how to create the content, right? If you are creating content for healthcare, like CPR, you need the healthcare experience to do that, right? If you are creating content for in UK, 2 years ago, I saw this content company creating content to teach the firemen how to actually extinguish the fire, right? And because you cannot send the fireman into a real fire scene, a new fireman into a real fire scene to train them, right? So you need all this simulation, and AR/VR is a very good simulation for that. So you need content creators also for people who knows the fireman industry, right? So these are all potential skills that are beyond just the normal engineering telco kind of thing. Yeah, of course, those are still there, right? So to address industry ecosystem, the right boxes are the skills that you need to have also, or good to have, right? It's not just the telco skills. Okay, as I mentioned, 5G is an ecosystem of future skills. So 5G alone, right, you look at it by now, is providing the connectivity. But connectivity alone is not good enough because you need to use it. It must be use cases and applications. And to realize that, you need AR/VR, which is another set of technology. You have robotics, you have AI, you have data analytics, you have blockchain. So all this coming together, and 5G provide the good conduit for all this to even function better than what they are today. Yeah. So 5G is really an ecosystem of future skills, the way I look at it. Yeah. Okay, I think this is my last slide. So for those who are interested to learn more about 5G, and I have a course with NUS, right, that you can sign up for. Is a combination of e-learning and also a face-to-face workshop, right? The e-learning focusing more on building your basic foundation knowledge of 5G, and the face-to-face workshop, we will discuss. I will show you use cases, and we will discuss using BMC, the business model canvas framework, to come up with new potential use cases and hopefully killer applications for the 5G industry. Yeah, and of course now with so many e-learning, right? So we got feedback to say, can we do a discussion, because we would like to discuss with the instructor. So we are also getting approval for SSG funding for the instructor-led workshop, even for the e-learning part. Yeah. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for the great sharing. So would you like to stop share your screen? I will put up some of the questions
Q&A popped
here.
up a few times, but I didn't manage to take a look.
It's all right. So it's a great time for us now to address some of the questions. Okay, so the use cases, I think most of this has been shared as well. Okay, so maybe this question. What changes will we see in 6G transitioning from 5G, from an anonymous attendee?
What changes will we see when the transition of 5G will happen? I don't know what is in 6G yet, to be very frank. I mean, yes, there's a lot of talk, right? Even, I think just yesterday, someone in Singapore told me that he's researching into 6G already. So frankly, I'm not a 6G expert, right? So what I know is today we are just going to commercialize 5G. And as I mentioned, right, 5G is not just a technology, right? There's a lot of things associated with it that needs to be ready, right? What we see is infrastructure. You need to have the network, you need to have the base station, right? And what we see is the consumer devices, like a portable or foldable phone, or the panel like kind of phone, right? But it's not just that. The most important thing, as I mentioned, is like spectrum, right? So spectrum is limited. It's a limited resource. You cannot just suddenly say, okay, this spectrum I want to use for 5G or 6G, right? So the standards need to define what frequency is 6G going to be used, right? So like 5G, there's 3 ranges of frequency, right? The most common one that Singapore is using is 3.5 gigahertz. There's a millimeter wave, which is more than 20 gigahertz. There's a very low one, which is less than 700, yeah? So all this spectrum, today, they are not idle, right? They are not just idling there doing nothing. For example, some of it in Singapore, some of the spectrum that we want to use for 5G are used by satellite. So I cannot just suddenly say I want to launch 5G and I bring down the satellite. So I need to clean up the spectrum so that I can use 5G. Same thing, before 6G can happen, which I predict, maybe if you look at my evolution, right, every 10 years is 1G to 2G, 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G. So it probably is a 10-year cycle to move from one generation to another generation. Maybe we'll move faster, I don't know, right? But I will foresee at least 8 to 10 years. So there are many things to be done before we can even talk about 6G. Yeah. So you need to clear up the spectrum, and there's this technical industry term called spectrum refarming. So for those of you who know, for example, Singapore today, we still have 3G, 4G coexisting, right? But no more 2G, right? In Taiwan, there's no more 3G because they retire the entire 3G spectrum and they refarm it, right? You reconfigure it, like a reconfiguration for 4G use, right? So same thing, when 5G comes up, Singapore potentially will need to retire 3G as well, and you can refarm some of this for use. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So there's another question from Go Teng Chiu. How are 5G sensors powered? Will power requirements for sensors a concern?
Yeah, so again, actually it's not just 5G. So a lot of these IoT devices, right, especially for the smart sensors, we are looking at low power connections, right? Because you need to put, for example, I was talking about this smart waste management where you put into the dustbin or whatever, right? You need that device, the sensors, to last for at least 10 years before you want to replace it again, right? So there are already a lot of low power sensors that's available, right? And there are also low power network, LPWA, that all this thing can sustain. But of course, that is one of the reasons why 5G wants to go with NB-IoT, right? The narrowband IoT network as well, because they complement each other rather well as compared 5G with maybe an unlicensed spectrum of LoRa and others, which may not have the best combination in terms of speed, throughput, and also power consumption.
Bill, do you have time? Just one last question. So what's your prediction in terms of pricing for 5G plans for consumers? Is it going to be more expensive or cheaper? What's your
This is a
take?
tough question. My prediction cannot change the way the telco want to price. So, I mean, again, there's this thing called Gartner hype cycle, right? Which we see a curve like that, right? It always say that if you are an early adopter of technology, you probably pay a little bit more, right? Premium, right? But again, you can Google also, Google for BCG, Boston Consulting Group, OPEX, right? OPEX, OPEX, right? So there was a paper published by BCG together with some inputs from us 2 years ago. In terms of the OPEX of 5G comparing to 4G, actually it is lower if you exceed a certain number of data usage, right? So for example, if you more than 10 terabyte, I can't remember the exact numbers, if you exceed 10 terabyte of data, right? 5G OPEX is lower than 4G. So logically, by that same token, telco shouldn't charge more because they benefit, their cost is lower running a 5G, right, in the long term as compared to running 4G. But of course, now CapEx investment is there, right, for any new technology. But from OPEX, which is more important from a long-term perspective, OPEX for 5G is supposed to be lower than 4G due to the massive connections that you have. So I expect them to charge cheaper to make it simple. But of course, it's not me to influence that decision. Yeah.
Great. So a lot of you have asked whether there's recording. Yes, we will be sending a recording link to each of you. Presentation, let me discuss this with Jim, see how much information we can share with you. Any further questions, you can reach out to Jim on LinkedIn. or you can go through Spectrum as well. So I would like to thank Jim for today's great sharing and insights. Thank you, audience, for joining us. Hope you had brought back new information for work as well as for personal capacity. And thank you to Healthcare FinTech Alliance as well in partnership for this webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Audience, please fill up the survey once you exit from this webinar. I look forward to see you at the next session, which is on the 27th of August on esports. Once again, thank you, audience. Thank you, Jim, for the great session today. So,
thank you, Sophia, and thanks to the audience for listening. Hope that it was useful and fruitful for you. Yeah.
Definitely. So stay safe, keep well, everybody. See you again. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.